You are a voice to your community, nation, and world. This is the Global Call.
Hi, my name is Skinner. I'm 26 years old and I live in Los Angeles, California. I've been doing music for about 20 years, which means I started doing it when I was 6, which means I must really like it. So I'm passionate about it. And I've been living in LA for about 2.5 years, just focusing on music for the past year. And it's been great. It's had its ups and its downs. I've lived on couches. I've lived on other people's floors. And then eventually I realized that no matter where I lived, that as long as I was doing what I loved, it was going to make me happy and life was going to be okay. So I'm currently still living on a couch, but I'm moving into a new place in a couple months, and no one tells you that it's going to be easy when you start doing something that you love. You don't realize how hard it's going to be, but it's always worth it in the end, because if you love what you do and you have a lot of people who are encouraging around you, then keep going for it, because eventually things will break. And so far, things are looking up for me.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I'm a pediatric nurse at a children's hospital, and I love working with children. I love working with desperate families, destitute families, and I love nations. Any nation, I love them. I love the children of the nations, and I love to travel. So if you're ever in Seattle, come visit me.
Hi, we have another great show lined up today on Global Call. We have two wonderful guests with us, Vanessa Larkin and Ajua Skinner, and they're with us today. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
And we're going to talk about some issues just that are going on around the world, human trafficking, kind of prostitution, the rights of women, human rights stuff. We're just going to touch on that. And so what do you guys, I mean, this is an issue that is definitely a hot topic, I would say, in the States, as far as awareness has been brought to people around the world. And what do you kind of feel like it has to do with? I mean, does it have to do with like a lack of respect for women, for the rights of children? Is it a human rights issue?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you feel?
Yeah, it's definitely a human rights issue. It's interesting because a lot of people think that that trafficking and prostitution are kind of the same thing, and that somebody's just, they choose to be a prostitute. But a lot of people have been kidnapped or thrown into situations where young children abducted, or their parents can't afford to have them, and they sell them. Awful things that no individual should ever go through, especially a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it doesn't really become personal to you until you encounter it face to face, when you see something that just grips your heart and you realize these are people. This is a human rights issue. This is a children's issue. This is a women's issue. And it's so important that we realize that it involves us, even though it may be afar off. And I've been learning that it isn't as far off as we think that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know both of you guys have had experience in this area to some degree. And, I remember going to Russia as a child and just seeing the prostitutes lined up down the street, like you just walk by and there's a line of them. But, even as you were saying, I think that's an important thing to mention, that really prostitution and human trafficking is different in a sense. I mean, it's based in the same issue, but it's different, where human trafficking, there's many prostitutes basically who have been trafficked, who didn't choose to be in that situation, who were sold or they're kidnapped. Right. I've heard so many stories of people who were kidnapped and, basically they abuse everything that is supposed to be sacred or supposed to be like a person you can trust. I heard of a group of girls thinking they were going to help with the Olympics, and then they had policemen come in and gang rape them, and they didn't even know that they were being sold, basically. But they had to gang rape them and stuff so that they wouldn't try to trust a cop, because they didn't know, can we trust someone in the police force? Can we not? You know? And so it's kind of like every person that they see is trustworthy. It's like they mess up their mind, so they don't know who to trust, who, you know, not to, all of that stuff. So it's definitely an issue that is plaguing our society for sure.
Absolutely.
We're going to watch just quickly a video of an interview with Rob Gary and Jeremy Valerian. They are two wonderful young men who have been really a voice to this issue.
Right.
They have full-time jobs, but they're committed to seeing human trafficking end. They just got done with a climb, which I'm sure they'll share about, called Climb for Captives. They decided to do it last minute, and they raised, what was it, $17,000 for climbing Mount Rainier, and they decided to do it last minute. They raised $17,000 to put toward the stopping of human trafficking, and you know, they use a lot of their time, you know, really to see change and their finances. And so we're going to listen to Rob Gary and Jeremy Valerian, and we'll be back with you.
My name is Rob.
And I'm Jeremy.
And we're coming at you live from Seattle, Washington. About a year ago, Jeremy and I began to get involved around this issue of human trafficking and modern-day slavery. A little known fact is that today, in this day and age, there's actually more instances of slavery and the subjugation of people for the purpose of profit than at any other time in history. And it all began as a conversation and the realization that Seattle, our hometown, is one of the foremost ports in the United States for people being smuggled into the United States for the purposes of slavery and human trafficking. Now, this can take a lot of different forms. Both men, women, and children are victims of it. It can occur as basic forced labor to incidences of such grotesque things as forced prostitution, child prostitution, different things like that. And so as this conversation began to grow amongst our groups of friends, we decided to start to do something about it. First of all, becoming aware, and then starting to take action. And from that, Jeremy actually had the opportunity to travel to India to find out more about this issue.
I had an opportunity about a year ago to go to a place called Mumbai, India, also known as Bombay. And in the city of Bombay, they estimate that there are about 100,000 women in prostitution. From the observations and encounters I had with different organizations working on the street, I found out that a majority of those women were kidnapped, usually somewhere between the age of 8 years old and 14 years old, were forced away from their families or taken from their families or sold by their families in some cases and forced into prostitution. And in that one city alone, there are 100,000 of those women. One of the other problems in that city is that because there's so many women in prostitution, there's thousands and thousands of children every year that are born into these brothels and forced into the slave trade. So I got to see firsthand the nightmare that these people live in when they are forced into selling themselves for sex, or these children that are forced at the age of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years old to be slaves, whether for work or for the commercial sex trade, and just really see firsthand that nightmare that exists for these children. I came back from India, and Rob and I and a few other friends started engaging this issue of what does it mean for us, now that we know what's going on, to try to take a stand, to fight for justice, to try to make a difference in this world. And we started having this ongoing conversation, and eventually we decided to do something a little bit outside the box. Rob and I both really enjoy climbing mountains and hiking, and we decided that we were going to try to climb Mount Rainier in Washington State, which is one of the most glaciated mountains in the United States. It actually has the most snow and ice of all the mountains in the lower 48 in the United States. So Rob and I, along with 4 other friends, decided that we were going to climb this mountain and try to raise money for an organization that rescues these women and children out of the brothels. We started kind of calling some of our friends, sending out emails, trying to raise awareness about what we were doing. And within 2 weeks, we started having calls come from around the world, from Europe, from the Middle East, from Australia. People started calling and sending money and wanting to be a part of what we were doing. And just in a matter of weeks, a few of us climbing a local mountain were able to raise almost $20,000 to free women and children from brothels. And as we did that and saw the response of people saying, we want to be a part of it, we think it's great that you guys are using your passions, using your community to fight this issue. And we were just amazed to see the response, literally from around the world, of people saying, we want to be with you guys. We want to stand against human trafficking and fight for justice. And that really opened Rob and I's eyes to this idea called open source activism, which Rob's going to tell you about. And we really want to encourage you to think differently about the way you engage justice.
We're excited to see groups of young people, particularly young people in our generation, begin to gather together, pool their talents, their resources, their connections to begin to fight injustice. Traditionally, the human rights activism movement has been left to governments and nonprofit organizations. And although there is progress being made by these types of organizations, the true power for change, for us to really see change in our world, is really rests in communities of like-minded friends coming together and actually doing something about it. And so this concept of open source activism, we really want to encourage you to go connect with your friends, connect with your community, learn about what's going on in your community. For us, it really started with simply being aware of what's going on here in Seattle. And then once you're aware, you can begin to take calculated, purposeful, and effective action towards doing something about it. It's time to start thinking outside the box about how we can deal with these long-standing injustices that we've been dealing with for literally centuries. But with this concept and power of community, we believe that we can truly change our world with this generation united with friends. And so we want to encourage you with that. Go out there and get to work.
Go get them.
So we're back from watching that amazing video, and isn't that awesome? You know, just that they feel that it's their job as men to stand in the gap for women across the world, and they really feel, you know, that it's an issue that men need to stand for, that because really it is an issue. If there wasn't what is the saying? If there wasn't a supply, or if there wasn't a demand, there wouldn't be a supply.
Totally.
And that really is a definite part of the issue. And so we're very thankful to Jeremy and Rob for everything they're doing. So now you guys have both been, you know, you have seen a lot in India and you've seen a lot in Africa. What is kind of, maybe Vanessa, we'll start with you. What is sort of some of the things that you saw there? You were there for a month working with this very issue.
Yeah, actually, Jeremy talked me into going to India and visiting the brothels, the streets, and visiting the rehabilitation centers. And when I was there, it was something you couldn't put into words when you saw it. There was just a desperation in the lives and the hearts of the people there, and you could just see it. It was something they wore, like a garment of just shame. And for me, when I was there, I was like, you know, what can I do when I'm here and I'm seeing this? And I felt overwhelmed. You know, my heart felt overwhelmed, Evangeline, because I thought, gosh, I'm just one person who lives in America and has a chance to be here and see this. But I know it was for a purpose. And I know that I'm called as a person, of human person, to reach out to the humanity of others and the inhumanity and justice and actually do something.
Absolutely. What sort of stuff did you see there?
Yeah, well, I had an opportunity to go right into the rehabilitation centers where you could talk to the women, talk to the children. What did you experience? And I think one of the stories that gripped my heart the most was a mother talking about having her children put under the bed in which she did her her job on, her business on. And I was just like, can you imagine a child being raised in an environment where they're in that all the time, and something this mom said that it's just constant. It's like an inundation, and then it's only a matter of time until they're abused themselves. And so what the moms can do is, you know, give their children away. And so what I saw, which was so hard, is parents that truly do love their children, women that really love their children, but see that they're headed down the same path that they are, into abuse and prostitution, and it's just a matter of time. And it's younger and younger. I was flabbergasted that a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old was a hot commodity in these brothels, because they're there, and their parents or mothers are just in that environment all the time.
Yeah, and you know, even with the mothers and stuff, you know, it kind of is something that people feel like that need and kind of get stuck into. It's not even something that is even a moral or whatever decision, but it's like they feel like they have to even live, or as an option. And you know, I think that's really where we come in too, is, you know, figuring out, you know, asking God, asking what can we do, you know, what can our part be, whether that's helping start small businesses to help them out of it. And I'm sure that you can talk on that. But, you know, I just wanted you to mention, Ajua, kind of about your experience in Africa on, you know, prostitution, even how you saw that as, you know, really it was because of them getting stuck financially, or you know.
Well, I met a young girl, actually. I was in a coastal region, and she lived
down the street, and so I would, you know, talk to her every so often, and I just met her and her friends, and it was hard because she was missing for a while, and I didn't know what had happened. And then
She was your neighbor or something?
Yeah, she was my neighbor, and she was just a pretty young little thing, and it was like, I wondered, like, where are your parents, you know? And she really was just taking care of herself, because her parents are pretty much like, we can't take care of you. So they just let her go on her own, and it was these young girls all living together. And it would seem like there was like leaders within the group or whatever, and they would kind of, you know, tell the other ones what to do. But it was kind of weird, because I got to know this one girl, and she had a really sensitive heart. She had just, like, she was homeless pretty much, and these girls took her in. But they would go to the witch doctors, and they would get perfumes and gels and things that had been pretty much had spells over them, so that they could entice these men to come to bed with them, so that they would be able to eat for the week, you know.
So they actually used potions of sort to entice them.
Things that that were pretty much, you know, essentially a witchcraft to entice these, you know, European men that were visiting, or whomever was, you know, had more money, so that they could survive. But I saw the one day when she was gone for a while, and I saw her come back, she had a sore on her leg, and it was an open sore, and it was really just excruciating looking, and she didn't have any, she didn't clean it out, she didn't do anything, and it was like none of these girls who were supposedly taking care of each other knew how to take care of themselves, and they didn't know how to take care of each other, really. And it was so sad, because here this young girl was forced out of her home because of poverty, and then was forced into prostitution because of poverty, and the very people who said they would quote unquote take care of her were letting her go by the wayside, because they didn't know, because they didn't even value their own lives.
Yeah. Well, we're here with Stephanie, and we are in San Diego. She is from San Francisco, California, and going to talk to us today about her experience with human trafficking, and she's had a lot of different experiences with it. And Stephanie, what are some of the human trafficking things that go on in your city?
Well, in San Francisco is commonly known as a sanctuary city, and so a lot of times people who are immigrants will come to San Francisco because it is a safer place for them to be. It is a place where they're not actively looking for people that are illegal immigrants to deport them. So you have a lot of people, it's a very welcoming place for many cultures, which makes it a wonderful place to live. But what you have with that is sometimes the law has a harder time prosecuting people, and a harder time knowing where people are coming from and what their history is.
Yeah.
So what you have in San Francisco is you have a place where there are actually over 90 massage parlors in the city. These massage parlors also act as brothels where prostitution is happening, and then commonly trafficking, particularly from Asian nations like South Korea. So with that, you also have a lot of things coming into play. The health department in the city is currently trying to catch up on issuing permits and doing inspections of all the massage parlors. So you have many that aren't up to speed on their permits with the Department of Health, and so it's easy to hide.
It is the #1 city in America for human trafficking.
Yes, in the current State Department report, San Francisco is the #1 city for trafficking in America.
Wow.
And while there are different investigations happening, there was actually just a couple weeks ago a national bust of a child prostitution ring that had many incidents in the Bay Area, all over the Bay Area. More needs to be done.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what are some of the grassroots things that you think can be done as a community, and even as governments, and you've seen different ways of doing it? What are some of the ways that you've seen that are effective?
Well, you know, on a national level, or on a level of legislation and governing, there definitely needs to be some changes coming. There's been some encouraging things that have happened in recent years, something called the T visa, which you can research more on the Department of State website. It's actually a visa they've created particularly for people coming out of human trafficking cases. Beyond that, I think probably one of the best examples of a country taking it on at a national level and addressing the issue has been Sweden.
Okay.
In 1999, Sweden's parliament ruled to decriminalize prostitution, legalize prostitution, however, to criminalize the buying of sex. And so what they did was they're saying we're viewing these women and children involved in prostitution as victims, which we know most of them are. And then saying, but if there's a victim, there's somebody who is the criminal here and needs to be prosecuted. So with that, they said we're going to decriminalize prostitution, but we are going to criminalize the buying of sex. You can sell it all you want, you just can't buy it. So they started throwing the book at the Johns, essentially. They would incur fines and even jail time for going and buying sex. What they've seen in the 9 years since they've done that is prostitution has come down 80%, and trafficking has all but disappeared. So it's really encouraging. And you have a lot of nations that have tried this decriminalizing prostitution. The problem is nobody is punished. And when there's a crime happening, there needs to be someone that is saying what you're doing is wrong. The people you're victimizing need to be protected, and something needs to be done about that.
Absolutely. And even in your city, some of your friends had attempted to reveal some of the places of where human trafficking was going on, and no one would do anything about it. Right?
Yeah. You know, on a level of one individual, I think you run into this feeling of feeling like this problem's so big, what can I do? But all of the great movements throughout history, I mean, if you think about the civil rights movement, it was a grassroots movement, essentially. People everywhere started saying, this is wrong, and I'm going to make my voice heard. So one of the number one things you can do is talk to people about it. I mean, crime and things where there's victims, they hide undercover. So when you start first exposing that, and then, you know, making your voice heard as a citizen and a consumer. We know that trafficking is not just sex trafficking, but there's people that are trafficked into this country to work, you know, hard labor in the fields of California, picking vegetables, in textile factories, and we know globally that is much more the case as well. So when you start putting pressure, say, on the retailers that you shop at, to guarantee that their line is slave-free, that's a huge step you can take. Because if the retailer is feeling the pressure from the consumer, then they'll give them what they want.
Right, and so it's a bigger problem than just obviously the sex industry of part of human trafficking, but it's also slavery of every kind, like the slaveries, different kinds of work that you named. It's all part of it.
Absolutely, and I think what people need to recognize too is that it's a global problem. I mean, a lot of the ways this has been able to happen is through globalization, which is a good thing, but it kind of has this underside that's not so good. And so you have to approach it from this thing of saying, this isn't just happening in India, this isn't just happening in Southeast Asia, this is happening in my city and in my community. And then making your voice heard, not just for your community, but those that are globally affected by this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and we will see you later. Thanks. You know, that's an amazing point, you know, that God really does have a value for each individual, that there's value in human life, there's value in even the mistakes that have been made, even if, you know, maybe you're in that kind of situation. It might not be exactly the same, but, you know, there's a redemptive purpose, you know, and God has a purpose for your life. There's redemption in it all. And, you know, regardless of what you feel your circumstances, I believe God wants to provide for your life, to be there for you, to be your father, to, you know, for these women, he cares for them. He wants to be there for them. And I believe that he's waiting for people really to be his hands and feet in the earth that can go and bring provision, that can go start businesses, that can go help them. You know, I believe it's our job as humans, if we're in a better situation, to lift people out of these sorts of situations. And Vanessa, you saw kind of in India some redemptive stuff going on. Like, what were some of the things people were doing?
Absolutely. I was so amazed. You know, when you see something so dark like that, you could almost feel hopeless. Like, gosh, what can we even do? And when I was there, I went to a rehab center for prostitutes and their children. There was children's centers for all different ages, and then there was also a children's AIDS home, and there was also a women's home for people that willingly came out of prostitution. You see, with prostitution, it's so complicated. The women feel trapped in there. They feel like their children are going to be abused and taken from them. And so when they finally choose to get out, there's so much greatness that God can do in their life. And so I thought that I would see these broken people when I went there, you know, and I thought, well, maybe they're going to be kind of somewhat assembled together because they have food and they have shelter. I'll tell you what, it is quite the opposite, because God has grabbed a hold of their heart, that He has restored them, and He has brought back what nobody else could buy back for them. He brought brought back their purity. He brought back their sanity. And what is so amazing in these little children, you would never know. You would walk into an orphanage of children and you wouldn't even know that they didn't have parents, that they had been abused. If I read some of their charts, some of their history, and I was amazed that these are the same children that I saw playing outside in the streets, so happy, so full of joy, and they have a future.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're probably reading their charts too from also a medical perspective as you're a nurse, you know, by profession. But that's awesome to hear about, you know, the redemptive stuff that's going on there. And so even today as we close, you've heard today from Vanessa, from Ajua, from Jeremy, and from Rob. And, you know, I believe that it should be an encouragement to all of us to, you know, begin to see what we can do in our communities. You know, it's not, you know we should respect human life. It's not, you know, just because somebody has a situation or gets raped or has something that happens to them in life, you know, there can be redemption. There can be change in their life. We've seen them. We've seen people all over the world, you know, go from a horrible situation to allowing God to change their lives. And that's the power. That's the power of the cross. That's the power of God, is that He can redeem those things which were lost. And so today, even if you're one of those people who've had things, it might not be this situation, but we'd encourage you, you know, to begin to allow God to redeem those areas, to begin to ask, even begin asking around, what things can I do within my community, within my nation, within the world? You know, I believe our generation needs to be aware of what's going on and to really desire, no matter where it's going on in the world, but to begin to really change that, to begin to see change happen. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, girls, for being with us. It's been an enlightening time, and we'll see you next time.
Beep. Take two.
And now for the dance against injustice.